Okay, so good afternoon to our Inspire Elsie's radio listeners. You're tuned in to Inspiring Talks with Ilhaam, and today we have back with us Melissa Visser. She's from the organization A21 campaign. They are a global non-profit and non-governmental organization that is dedicated to abolishing human trafficking everywhere and forever. So welcome back to Inspire Elsie's radio, Melissa.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's always so fun chatting with you. And yeah, I love your passion of just, taking on these big conversations and these big topics. So yeah, it's an honor for me to be here.
Mm. I think it's difficult in the beginning to hear about such things, but we need to normalize solutions. And that is
Mm,
why, like, I like to invite people back so we can like get an update about what you're doing and what's happening now in that world. And because there's a lot of cases going on now in the
mm,
human trafficking world that is giving global awareness of what is going
mm,
on. That's why I also wanted to speak to you because I was watching the news, and then in the news, Melissa, they said
mm,
that Virginia Giuffre, who was a sex slave for many, many years under the very
mm,
big case of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, and many other people that are implicated in that just have not been named yet. So we want the Epstein files to be released. Um,
mm,
and her book she wrote, and there's images and pictures. It's like kind of like a diary. I haven't read the book. I really do want to read the book because I
mm,
feel like survivor stories Oh, not so much focused on, but they always focus on the perpetrator because they like almost like
mm.
so interested in the wow, how did he do it and like all these things. But I feel like the survivor's voice and their story needs to be told more so that we can prevent these things because prevention is better than cure. But can you just update or not update, just refresh our listeners' memory of A21, what you stand for and what you do? Mm.
Yes, no, definitely. That's such an interesting. I've also been following that now that you've mentioned that. It's so interesting. And I definitely agree with you that, there needs to be a platform where survivors' voices are heard more, and especially their perspective and what they've been through, and just encouraging them for being such a strong individual. So, yes, that's definitely very interesting to follow. But just to recap the listeners, so A21 is a global organization. We operate in about 14 countries, and we are very honored to have one of Africa's hubs here in South Africa, based in Cape Town. So we operate throughout South Africa, throughout Africa. We're very passionate about partnerships and especially our African footprint. And A21 has three main branches. So it's Reach, Recover, and Restore. The first one, Reach, is very much education, training, prevention. And this is also where I come into the picture. So I'm the Reach coordinator. This is where volunteers get involved, but it really is, just educating the public and equipping them on how to spot human trafficking and what to do next. Recover is, our middle branch. A21 also runs the National Anti-Human Trafficking Hotline number. And how that looks like if you suspect a case or if you suspect that you are a victim of trafficking yourself, you can phone that number and then we have a dedicated call specialist team that would answer that phone 24/7, 365 days a year, and then, have this conversation with the victim or the person suspecting it. And what that looked like, they would liaise with SAPS, with the Hawks, with medical teams to kind of like identify this victim and then immediately get them out of that situation. We also do job vetting services in that department, and also we have teleinterpreting services. So it really is an incredible branch, and they do all of our case management. And then our restore branch is very much a full circle moment. So as soon as we identify that victim, we place them in a accredited safe house, and then they get a designated social worker from A21 who kind of walks the road with them. Because of course, if you come out of a situation like that, you have a lot of trauma and you kind of view the world in a whole different lens than you would if you came out of a normal situation. So it's very important for us to get them independent, get them back on their feet, and actually get them recovered in the sense of sending them for counseling, all the medical checkups, just to really get them back on their feet and restored back into society. So yes, that is A21 in a nutshell.
Mm. I feel like when you in a situation like that, you feel like there's like no way out, and your mindset is very different to when you are happy and free. So can you take us
Mm,
like from just a success story? Because I like to base things on success stories so that we know that there is footsteps that people can walk into and that there is a good like the light at the end of the tunnel kind of situation.
mm,
So like how does the situation look when they before you get to them, and or like their state of mind when you get to them. Okay, let's when you get to them, to compare to like people that are successfully integrated through your program.
Hmm. I love that question. And I also, one thing that gets our team motivated, of course, is all the success stories
Mm.
and seeing how, from the beginning of that survivor to the end of their story. But one very recent story, it was last week that our team traveled to Eswatini, Swaziland. And we actually met with the survivor there that had been through our program. So she was trafficked from Swaziland into South Africa, looking for a better
Oh,
opportunity. And then eventually, she got hold of the human trafficking hotline number. She phoned it, and we were able to get her out of that situation. And, that's kind of where the journey started. But when she came in, like you say, they have a whole different mindset. They really struggle to trust and to get back into society, to trust job opportunities, relationships. It's really, really difficult for them. And also just the trauma that comes with it all. After a couple of years, she felt like she finally felt ready to look society, back in the eyes again. And she went through amazing courses like job upskilling courses here in South Africa, where she did kind of like barista courses and
oh, nice.
hospitality courses and all of that. And then we sent her back to Eswatini. And when we met her now, it was actually like we were looking at a different person. So she's married, she has two children, she's working in a barista job. And we just saw how beautiful it is from seeing her from the beginning and then seeing her as a whole human being back in her community. And like I say, being able to be a mom and a wife and have a job. So that is just kind of like how it worked, and what our goal is from reach all the way to restore. That is the goal, is to get them back into society as a whole being, as an independent being. So yes, that's definitely one of the recent success stories that I can share.
I wanted to ask you, there's a lot of countries where people go to, um, where they kind of lure you in with either job or um, under false pretenses. Can you like
Mm,
tell people how to verify or like how to ensure that you're not gonna fall into that trap of human trafficking? Like, what do you look
mm,
out for? What are the signs? And you have a hotline, so yeah, also if you can share the number with them, because there's so many people looking for work, especially from Africa or
mm,
lower income areas or countries. So they look for work overseas, or they look for work from international companies in the country that they're in, and they apply, and then shoop, and then they're gone,
mm.
and they don't know
Yeah,
how to
I
get back
think.
in. Like how do you what are those signs that you need to look out for?
That's such a great question, and I think it's such a relevant question, of everything that's been happening, not just in South Africa but around the world. If we look at, these Myanmar scams in Thailand or Southeast Asia, when we look at
Dubai is
these,
also a big topic
yes,
now. Mm.
yes, Dubai, these Alabuga jobs that we've seen on TikTok, like there's so much happening at the moment. So I think that's such a relevant question. But the first thing that I want to mention is, a lot of times we think, and this is for sure the case, but a lot of times we think that, South Africans get trafficked outside of South Africa into another country, and then our neighboring countries come to South Africa and get trafficked here. But it's also very much reality that people in South Africa gets trafficked in South Africa,
Mm.
that they may be, coming from a small town and they're moving all the way to Cape Town and then gets trafficked there. So it really does happen, under our noses in our very own community, and also cross border. So it's very much on both sides that we've been seeing it. But I would say the biggest thing, one thing that I can leave with everyone, if it sounds too good to be true, then it is too good to be true. We've seen so many, false advertisements online that says, come work on a farm in Italy, full accommodation paid. I'll pay for your flight tickets, bring your family members, bring friends, 50,000 Rand a month. To be honest, if I see that job, I want to go there. Who doesn't want to work, free accommodation, free airplane? Like that's incredible, but
Mm.
it's too good to be true. And the reality is, if you're in a vulnerable situation, that's when exploitation can grab you. And one thing to realize is that we live in a vulnerable country where jobs are not easy to find. So
Mm.
we have to realize that we are all vulnerable when it comes to employment, but we need to know the red flags. And number one red flag is, if it sounds too good to be true, then it is. Another basic red flag is if they're offering you free accommodation, free plane tickets, if they're offering, for your family to come over. That is benefits that they're already giving you. And then what happens is, most of the time, the people would take the job, and as soon as they get to the job, the perpetrator would tell them, you need to pay me back. So then they're stuck in this debt bondage situation where they can't leave. So one thing that I really encourage people with as well is that there's no such thing as for free. You'll always get to that situation, the person will tell you, you owe me back. Another red flag is, if you see these free emails or the email doesn't make sense. For example, let's say Head of Health Clinic sends you an email and you see this email saying, um, David at smiley face. That is a red flag. If it doesn't make sense, if it doesn't correlate with the business, with the people that work there, that is a big red flag. So on that, like I've mentioned, our recovery department does a full job vetting service. We have literally a team dedicated to doing that. And it's so important for us just to spread that awareness, because not just our youth are looking for new jobs, but we as adults, we're currently looking for new jobs to grow ourselves. But it's so important to vet a job, because we have such a strong database of, specific locations, specific emails, specific names, that you might think it's just a simple, job vetting, but for us it's a tipple. For us, it's the same name that keeps popping up. It's the same location that keeps reaching out to people. So again, that's why it's so, so important. So you can either job vet through our website at a21.org. And then the second one is through our hotline number, which is 0800 222 777. Literally as easy as you pick up the phone, you say, I've received these, I've seen this on Facebook, you send us some screenshots, and we literally verify the job for you. So we really encourage everyone to make use of this service.
Can you tell us a little about the law side of things? Um, so how many perpetrators actually go to jail? Because it is very difficult for a survivor to speak out. Because I mean, we were speaking earlier about Virginia, and Virginia did pass away, and we under very sketchy circumstances. So, like the perpetrators, like what is the conviction rate? Like, and
Mm,
I understand like it is a very difficult thing to talk about because especially if somebody had so much control over you, it is a fear that you could either go back into that situation or they might come and harm you. But how important
mm,
is it to have like ambassadors that speak out on behalf of survivors or is a survivor and like maybe you can write a book like Virginia did. Maybe you can do podcasts. Like don't be out there in the public eye, but maybe do it like on a different platform. But how important is it
mm.
to for survivors to have a voice after they've recovered?
That's such a great question. And the first thing that I want to mention is that human trafficking is such a difficult crime to pinpoint, because
Mm,
it often presents itself as other societal issues, such as gender-based violence, a general laborer, domestic servitude, a child begging on the street. It can often present or wear a mask of other societal issue. But when you finally like dig a little bit deeper underneath the surface, you can see that this is potentially a victim of trafficking. So that's number one. It's a very difficult crime to spot. So
mhm,
on the legal side of things, it's we as A21, we can identify them, and then we need to take it to, for example, the NPA and say, this is a victim of trafficking. What can we do about it? And then it really is up to the victim. We initially leave this step to them. Do they want to speak out on what happened to them? Do they want to tell us who this person is? Is it a family member that, that lured them into this? Is it someone that they do not know? We really leave the choice up to them. And I must say, a lot of these victims, they find it very difficult to speak out, especially, I'd say almost in the first year, just because everything is so raw and still so fresh. And like you say, they are scared of the perpetrator, and if they, maybe go after their families or after them. So what we've seen is that, in the first year it's very difficult to get information out of them, but as the healing journey continues, they're always so much more open to talking about it. And that's why it's so important for us to have a holistic approach to each of these survivors, because some people are so bold and they want to talk out about it and they want to, share their story. But for others, it's so raw and so, I almost want to say, so traumatizing still, that it takes years for them to realize and recognize what happened to them. And then eventually it comes to this, this step of saying, this is the person who've hurt me. I want to open a case. A lot of our neighboring countries as well, the people that get trafficked into South Africa, they, for example, are very hesitant when speaking out about it because it most often happened in their community. So for them then to relocate and go back into that community, they can't just speak out about what happened to them. So how basically, just to sum up my answer, we approach this very much, what the survivor needs in that moment. Would he or she want to open a case? Is it still very traumatizing for them? And what the next steps are? What do they need right now to heal, if that makes sense?
Mm. Melissa, okay, say somebody is in a situation and they just come to realize now that maybe they are being trafficked. Because sometimes,
Mm,
like you were saying, it's under the guise of something else, and then like sometimes you're not even aware that you're being trafficked because somebody's lying to
mm,
you or they're making you promises. But now you come to the realization, okay, look here, I feel like something's not right. Um, what evidence can somebody gather in that time that they are with that person, for example, so that that person can be convicted? Like, what can they
mm.
gather before they get to you, for
Yes.
example?
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing that I want to mention, and this is kind of like, our statement when it comes to the hotline number, if you suspect it, report it. So there's no requirement of you need to have your ducks in a row, you need to have all the evidence, you need to have all the voice notes and the pictures. If you suspect human trafficking, literally even the tiniest bit, either in yourself or you suspect it from someone else, please report it, because then from our side we can, get on a call or go to a physical screening and we can screen that victim. So just to put it into perspective, to identify a victim of trafficking, there needs to be an act, means, and purpose. But this is something that we identify in the screening. So we really, all we're asking is for that person just to speak up. So there's not necessarily a list of things that you need to prove. That is for us and that is for the MPA. But for the
Mm.
victim themselves or the person suspecting it, really just report it and we take it from there. And we as A21, even if you do come to us and, you know, we see that this is not necessarily a trafficking case, but it is a gender-based violence case. We're not just going to leave it there. We will still take the necessary steps into getting you into the right, into the right place, contact people. So again, we really just encourage, if you suspect it, please do report it.
Mm. Do you have programs that you go like across the country or in the Western Cape? Like, how can people learn about you and about the work that you do? Mm.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And like you said in the beginning as well, prevention is where everything starts. Like prevention is literally I want to say, the first line of defense when it comes to human trafficking.
Exactly,
So
Melissa.
if you Mm.
Mm.
So if you go to a21.org, you can find all of our resources, including our educational programs. So we have three preventative programs, one for early childhood development, that's literally 3 to 6 years old. Then we have a primary prevention program, which is everything from 6 to 13 primary. And then we have secondary prevention program, which is basically high school. So that is free, accessible to all. You can do e-course as well. So we encourage educators, parents to do these e-courses because it just teaches you on how to, have these, I almost want to say, age appropriate conversations with your children to literally teach them from a very young age, all the way up till 18 years old. And then we have our basic education in the sense of, training professionals, training parents, training frontline staff. So there's really such a broad variety on our website. So please go visit a21.org to have a look at all of those.
Melissa, in your experience, because you know everything about this industry, so somebody that is a layperson that is not aware of human trafficking, or they maybe just heard about it, but they don't know really anything about it. What is the single biggest misconception that the average person has about human trafficking that your awareness efforts are constantly fighting to correct?
Mm. I would say there's two. yeah, two that comes to mind. The very first one is that, human trafficking doesn't happens in South Africa. It doesn't happen in Cape Town. It doesn't happen in my community. But the reality is it really does. We've we've literally been seeing it all over from the smallest town in South Africa to one of the biggest, capital hubs in South Africa, all the way throughout the country. So it's really so important for people to realize that human trafficking can happen under our noses. And the reality is human trafficking has been moving from a physical thing to an online thing. And that is another big thing to consider because people are you don't need to walk in a dark alleyway anymore to get trafficked. You can
Mm.
literally be in the safety of your home, in your bedroom, playing a game, and you can get trafficked. And that's why a big misconception is human trafficking doesn't happen to me. Human trafficking doesn't happen in South Africa, but it can happen on your very phone in your living room. That's the first one. The second one is that human trafficking only affects women and children. Men are also really victims of human trafficking. We see this with construction workers, seasonal laborers. We see this with farm workers that men also really can fall into this. And again, one of the biggest thing that we spread awareness on is if you are a vulnerable person, you can be a victim of trafficking. Vulnerability does not discriminate, it does not favor. And again, we live in a vulnerable country, so we all have aspects of vulnerability. So I would say that's the two biggest misconceptions that people have.
Melissa, you were saying earlier that it does happen everywhere and you think it doesn't happen. Can you paint us like a picture of like a small town trafficker? What do that look like compared to like a city trafficker? Like just so that we can become more aware about of this.
Yes, I would say it's very much the same. It just happens in different areas. So, for example, we would see, people from small towns in the Northern Cape, or where there's really a lack of resources, they would get trafficked into Cape Town, into Johannesburg. But it can also happen literally in this small town where, you're being sold as a sex worker on the side of a street, where that's, you can think that's maybe the prostitute of the town, or maybe that's the brothel of the town. But if you dig a little bit deeper, you can actually see that these people might be victims of trafficking. But that same scenarios can be, in a big capital city such as Johannesburg. We have a street, for example, you have a street full of prostitutes, and you think that's a money market. But if you really dig deeper, you see that these victims are victims of trafficking. And same, with the job opportunities, they get maybe lured into, you know, cross-border trafficking. So it's really the same scenarios that we see in both small towns and big towns. It just it's just different places, if that makes sense.
But you get different kinds of trafficking. So once you like just define trafficking for people, because when they hear the word trafficking, then it's not really there isn't an emotional connotation to it. So can you like define the term trafficking so that they can understand what it means?
So trafficking, I would say in very simple matters, trafficking and exploitation, simply put, it's giving someone a false sense of hope and a false sense of opportunity. I always say that it usually happens, expectation turns into exploitation. So someone comes in with this false sense of hope, either hope of a companion, hope of a lover, hope of a new opportunity, hope of an educational opportunity. They come in with this false sense of hope, false sense of expectation. And because of that vulnerability, they get exploited. And again, that's why we always say that vulnerability is not the problem, but not knowing the red flags are the problem. So, yeah, does that make sense?
Yes. Melissa, is trafficking kind of like modern day slavery? Would you say that?
For sure. That is a perfect way of putting it, for sure.
Mm. Because you kind of belong to somebody and they can do whatever with you and they can take you wherever and force you to do things even if you don't want to
Mm,
do it, whether it's sex, whether it's labor, whether it's
mm,
anything, like you are being controlled by them and you don't have your own will, you can't leave because they will threaten you. So it is
mm,
basically modern day slavery. If you can put it in that terms, then maybe they can understand that is equal. So trafficking equals modern day slavery. So,
100%.
for our listeners, um, what is one immediate step besides, like, say, I don't have a phone or they take my phone away from me or access to the outside world? What can I do, to get out of that situation?
If are you saying now in a situation where you can't report
Yeah,
it?
like say I can't report it, like say I, even if I have a phone and they're monitoring my phone, like what can I do to get out of that situation? Like, and if I run away, they will come and find me. Like, how do you get out of a situation like that?
I would say the biggest thing, yeah, number one is always if you suspect it, report it. And if you have a phone, please do report it. But in a situation where you do not have the phone, I would always encourage someone just to speak about it. One example that I can use, so we have a partnership with an organization that specifically, goes out into the streets and literally just start a conversation with people. And
Mm-hmm.
out of that conversation, they're able to identify them as victims of trafficking. So, for example, one specific story that I can mention is this organization. One evening, they decided we're going to have a walk, and they just started having conversations with these prostitutes. And then, they just shared their story that they are being monitored and they're not getting fed well and they're not getting paid really, and they're actually being forced to do this. And literally, right there, it was a penny dropped moment, and that organization was able to, call us and say, we think we have a victim of trafficking. So I would say the very first thing is you are going to get in contact with public, even if it's a doctor, even if it's just someone on the street. Just have a conversation with them. Just say, this is what's been happening to me. I don't know if it's normal, but I need someone to know, because these people, they literally get trained to being afraid of speaking up, and they get trained of being afraid of authorities. But literally just sharing what's been happening with you can, like I say, can give us a tip off, and we can rescue you out of that situation.
Mm. Mm. I know your organization, Melissa, at A21, you kind of focus on um after you've rescued somebody. So like what are some of the things that they go through once they reach you holistically? Like, because you have to go
Mm,
through a lot. And you were saying earlier, like, sometimes only after a year do somebody really, really open up to you, or starts to
mm,
speak about this situation. So it's also about
mm,
patience. So once they come to you, um, what do you do for them? Like, because do you help them get work, you help them restore their lives, and you help them reintegrate back into society? And a lot of that also comes with trust issues, because once your trust has been
mm,
broken, then it's very difficult to trust people again, because like you live in fear now. So like tell us
mm.
about how you kind of restore that person's dignity.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's such an important question, because I think there's definitely a big lack in understanding, the complex trauma that comes with, coming out of a situation of being trafficked. So just understanding, what trauma does to a person, and what being exploited does to a person, because it does not just take a toll on their physical bodies, but it really impacts them psychologically. So I'd say the very first thing, or our approach, first of all, like you said, is holistic. We don't see the program doesn't look the same for everyone.
Hmm.
If we see this person needs, a little bit more time, we give that person time. And with that said, we also don't have a strict time limit. There's no such thing as 3 years you need to be out. There's survivors that's been with us for years, literally for years, and then there's survivors that only been with us for months. It really depends on the individual and what they need. So if we see that this individual is really struggling, and that they're struggling to open up, struggling to trust, then we give them space. There's no such thing as like putting everyone in a certain box. And just like that is our programs. If we see that this person is really, they need upskilling, or they need certain requirements to get a job, then we work a program out for them. If we see this person, for example, is really traumatized, and they struggle to look society in the eyes again, there's like a whole different like counseling and therapy program for them. So it really depends on what the survivor needs. And like I say, they go through phases, a phase where they need counseling, and then a phase where they need, a job. And A21 is really just there to assist them through these phases. So there's no pushing them, there's no kind of guiding them. We're really just there to assist their journey in this healing process.
Melissa, you said you were following the Virginia Epstein case. What is your opinion on that situation and situations like that? Because
Mm,
that's like that is an isolated thing. It is
mm.
just been exposed now, well, for the past few years. So like, how do you feel about that situation? What do you want to see happen from that
mm,
situation internationally and locally? Because they used to come to
mm,
South Africa also.
mm. No, I would say, like I said in the beginning, it's super interesting and it's interesting to see just kind of how it's unfolding. But I think the biggest highlight for me is exactly what you said in the beginning, just these survivors getting a voice, where they've been suppressed and they've been made small and they just kind of like been put aside. And like you say, the focus is usually on the perpetrators and how their minds work and, you know, just everything about them, but now the focus is so much more on the survivors. So I would say that's the biggest highlight for me. It's just giving them a voice and just giving them the space to talk about it. So I'd say that's the biggest thing that, has been driving me to watch this. And also what I've liked to see afterwards is also just these survivors looking up to these, the Epstein survivors and saying, if they can speak out about it, then I can speak out about it. And I think that's the biggest thing. Yeah, that's been a highlight for me.
Mm. And I just want to also bring we only have about 4 minutes left, Melissa, but um just be careful also like the companies that you apply to because a lot of these people are opening model agencies, entertainment world agencies, and it's really just a mask for all the criminal activities and the
Mm,
devious behaviors, whether it's abuse, whether it's sexual abuse, whether it's like any form of abuse. So they use
mm,
these companies as fronts and like they also can lock you in with a contract because
mm,
I don't know if you read the story where this guy was murdered in China. His name is Yu Ming Long. They know him as Alan
mm,
Yu, and he was murdered. And they were saying in China because it's a communist country, um, they have companies, and once you sign a contract with them, it's kind of what you were saying earlier. And then to get
mm,
out of the contract, you have to pay almost millions and billions of rands. How is that possible for an average person to do? So they lock you
mm,
into these situations and then they use you. And he was used by this company for 12 years and he
mm,
apparently committed suicide. Nobody believes that story because it's everyone is starting to see the truth of the matter now, especially with Virginia's book. It's like kind of like a catapult where everything is opening up, where people are
mm,
talking out and people are putting like two and two together because a lot of these things get cleaned up so quickly, Melissa,
mm.
that like you don't even know. Like apparently like within this organization almost 20 people were killed before him and now people are starting
Wow.
to connect the dots and they're like but something doesn't add up here and these people are
Mm,
so rich that it is a fearful thing because it's not like oh it's a businessman down the road and he has like a shop
mm.
down the road. These are like billionaires and it is a
Yes,
very fearful thing. So like I understand why people don't know to talk out but you need to talk out. You need to build
100%.
your network. You need to have people there for you. You need to have a voice. You need to
Mm,
have um, a footprint in this world. Don't give them their way and their footprint and their history and
mm,
only their story gets told. And their story is obviously now highly polished and no one will believe you.
mm,
But just speak out and stand together. I think that is also
100%.
don't you think they must all stand together?
Yeah, 100%. And like I've mentioned, one literally a heartbeat of A21 is partnerships because no one
Partnership.
can do this alone. The survivors can't do it alone, the frontline workers can't do it alone. We all need to take hands, and like you say, we need to speak about it. We need to shed light on it because, like you say, it's like a worm, a can of worms that it just opens up, and in a split second, it's
Exactly.
just gone. So it's so important to shed light on the reality of it, to speak out about it. So that's why I also want to commend you again for taking on these hard topics on this radio station because it's so important
Mm.
to talk about this.
No, no, we need to have these conversations. It is very
Mm.
difficult and it is disheartening and like to hear these people's stories is like sometimes you don't like not that I don't believe them, but it's unbelievable to me that they could have been in that
Yes.
situation. Like how can
Yeah.
another human being do this? But you must also understand how collective minds work, and that is why we also need to focus on psychology because you need to
Mm,
understand that an individual mind works different to a collective mind. When people are together, they don't
mm,
think the same. They think
mm,
differently in a group, so we need to also understand people psychologically. And that is
mm.
why I also believe in therapy. We need to go to therapy. You
Mm.
don't need to go to therapy just because you feel like something's wrong with you. You can go to therapy when you're
Mm.
okay also, just to maintain
Yes.
yourself. I feel like we
Mm,
need access to health. We need access to mental health. We
mm,
need access to organizations like yours, A21, Melissa Visser, please contact Melissa. She's always there. She's the reach coordinator for A21. So
Mm.
we're running out of time, Melissa, but we have less than a minute. But thank you so much for your time. And you can go to their website, you can get the information, you can contact them, so that you don't have to be a victim and you can be a survivor and you can
Mm.
write a book like Virginia Joffrey and be a hero
Yes.
and take the risk, and so that no one else has to suffer at the end of the